Gender-Based Violence and the Intestate Succession Act of 1998 are the subtopics that we are going to deal with in the part 2 of the video for the topic Gender Equity and Equality. Good. So we start with gender-based violence. What is gender-based violence? This is simply the violence including men and women, in which the women are the victims. Very important here. The women are the victims. They're the ones who receive the violence. But it's not always about men abusing women, but also some women abuse men physically and verbally. When we talk of women physically abusing the men, there are some sugar mummies who only take let's say just the young ones just for sex and such. Then verbally, I can talk of a woman insulting a man. So men also are abused by the women. That is what we call gender-based violence. It should involve the women and the men. Gender-based violence takes various forms. But we'll discuss physical, psychological, and structural violence. The three forms of gender-based violence. Okay. So we start with physical violence. This one is simple and it is very common. This is simply the violence directed on the body, directly on the body physically. For example, raping, beating someone, punching, slapping, kicking, stabbing, and the like. Shooting, sexual assault, all those things which are directly indicated physically on the body are what we call physical violence. Simple. Psychological violence is most destructive. We'll just hear the word psychological, something that has to do with the mind. Something to do with the mind. So this includes violence towards the mind. Violence towards the mind of someone is very destructive. It's very destructive. For example, humiliation, threats, harassment. You insult someone, that is directed on the mind, not on the body, no. On the mind. So that is psychological violence. The last one is structural violence. This is simply the violence that exists within structures of institutions. Here we are talking about what? Institutions. The violence that exists within structures of institutions. It occurs in economical, political, social, and military systems. It arises from unjust and repressive social structures such as poverty, land eviction, and lack of access to services. Land eviction. For example, you bought a plot. Now, it's like the papers are not that much clear. Papers are not valid. All of a sudden, the council just comes and grab your plot to say you are no longer the owners of this plot or this land. It's not involving men and women at that particular time, but this institution and the people, institution and the citizen, all together. So that is what we call structural violence. Done on the three forms of violence. We have physical violence directly on the body, psychological violence on the mind, and structural violence, which is the violence which exists in the structures of institutions. Now, what causes gender-based violence? What are the causes of gender-based violence? One is socialization. Socialization. This involves induction of young ones into the norms and values of a particular society or a new member of society. Now, here we're talking about the learned cultural behaviors. The learned behavior based on cultural practices and beliefs that disadvantage women and the children, especially the girl child. There are some behaviors which are just learned based on the culture of a certain society. Because of that, gender-based violence comes in. Now, the learning is called what? Socialization. So that's why socialization is a cause of what? Gender-based violence. Gender role stereotyping. I think I did not talk about this term. Gender role stereotyping. As for this one, we've got the societal beliefs, the myths, and the attitudes that men and women, by virtue of their socialization, should perform. They should perform. There are some tasks which are just directed for men or for women. Now, those are not biologically, but it's just described by a particular society to say men should do this, women should do this. For example, women are supposed to cook in the house. That's according to the cultures. Women must cook. But it's not really that, it's just a woman who should cook. No. Now, that's because a woman has not cooked, the husband will come, why haven't you cooked? And then they'll be beating and such and such. They'll start fighting because the woman has not performed the role described by a particular society. That's gender role stereotyping. Now, you as a man, can't you cook? Have you seen? So this causes gender-based violence. Then, low self-esteem by the perpetrator. Perpetrator is simply a person performing an action. So here, the perpetrator, we're talking about someone performing the gender-based violence. They lack low self-esteem. How they value themselves. That's what self-esteem means. So, low self-esteem by the perpetrator. Then apart from that, we have insecurity, social and economical dependence by the abused. Social and economic dependence, this is by the abused. When you talk of economic dependence, let's talk of some women. They only depend on what? On men to provide for them economically. They depend on men economically. So there I find that a person is being beaten at home. A wife is always beaten, but simply because their families are not that much rich, or their families cannot afford to feed them, the woman will just be enduring the injuries. But she cannot go back to her parents because nothing will happen there. That is because of depending on on the men. If I know that person can afford or can sustain her life alone, then she cannot be receiving the beats, the humiliations each and every day. You can just go, no, I'm going to my own house, I'll start staying on my own. That's how it is. Insecurity. Causes of gender-based violence. Socialization, gender role stereotyping, low self-esteem, and insecurity. Very good. So, now, what are the effects of gender-based violence? Effects of gender-based violence. 1. Oppression of the spouse. The abused cannot realize his or her potential and contribute fully to the development of the family and society. you oppress your spouse. If it's a man, you oppress your woman. If you are a woman, you oppress your man. He will not be realizing, in the case of the man, he will not be realizing his potential as a man. Say, I'm a man, I need to do this. Because you always insult him. What can you bring here? You fool. What? So that's oppressing him. He cannot realize his potential as a man to say, I should do this, I can do this, I can do this. In order to bring about development of the family and society. Then 2, abused may be fearful, angry, or preoccupied with their own safety and may not be willing to perform expected duties. They may be fearful, angry, or preoccupied with their own safety, and may not be willing to perform expected duties. A wife is always beaten. A wife is always beaten. So, at a point, she can become fearful or just angry, and then she will not cook. She will not perform duties like taking care of the children, cleaning the house, those roles. She will not perform because of the anxieties and the angry and the fear. Maybe she can just be scared to say, when my husband comes back, I think today he will beat me because I've done this and this. She has just made a simple mistake, but she'll become guilty. Even before the husband comes, she'll be guilty. So she will fail to perform her roles to the fullest. So gender-based violence is really bad. Then it leads to the spread of STIs. When we're talking about the effects of gender-based violence, think of the 3 forms of violence that we have discussed: the physical violence, structural violence, and the psychological violence. So here we talk of sexual violence, e.g. rape case, defilement. That brings about the spread of what? STIs, because in most cases, a person who is raped is not consent. Person who is raped is not consent. These are 2 different things. Rape case, let me explain on this. Rape and defilement. So, for rape case, having sex or having sexual intercourse with someone who has no consent for that, or having sexual intercourse with someone unconsciously who is not, he or she is not consenting. He or she has not intended to do that, but you have just heard that, like, you are just forcing. So for rape case, even an old person can be raped. That's how it is, as long as he or she is not consent. Now for defilement, is simply having sexual intercourse with a minor, someone who is below the age of 16. That's defilement. So make sure you differentiate this, because they can bring them in the exam. So for rape case, in most cases, you find that people hate themselves. They hate themselves because the other partner is not consent. Blood will come out and there will be spreading of STIs, e.g. HIV. So that is the effect of what? Gender-based violence. Then we come to physical, mental injury and death. This one is simple and straightforward. Physical injury, you always beat your wife. The eyes will be swollen. She will lose her teeth. One tooth will come out. That's because of the physical violence. The beatings, they are just too much. Mental injury. We've got mental injury. Mental, something that has to do with the mind. find that people are always depressed, always depressed. This brings about hypertension or BP because of thinking too much. Always depressed, always depressed. After that, then what comes is what? Death. That comes is what comes is death, because after BP that will develop into what we call stroke. People die, or just from BP can kill you, you die. So these are the effects of what? Gender-based violence. Now, ways of reducing GBV. How can we reduce gender-based violence? 1, speaking out about the problem. You speak out. 2, sensitize the community about GBV. You sensitize them. Assisting couples to discuss and resolve their problems. They've got problems, you just let them be. It's their house. It's their house. No. Help them to discuss and resolve their issues. Reporting cases of violence to police victim support unity. You report to say he had beaten his wife. Report him to the victim support unity. They'll work on him. They'll deal with him or her. There are women who beat their men. Encouraging victims to go for legal advice. Victims are those people who have received the GBV. For example, a woman who has been beaten is a victim at that particular time, or a man who has been beaten is a victim. So you encourage those people to go for legal advice. NGOs. The non-governmental organizations. We've got non-governmental organizations that give legal advice to the victims. Okay, since your husband beats you a lot, I think you should do this and this, you should do this and this. They will advise you. Those are the ways of reducing gender-based violence. Now, let us talk about the intestate succession. The Intestate Succession Act of 14th May, it was established on 14th May 1989. 1989. How did I write 98? 1989. This one, it only stipulates how the property of the deceased is a person who has died. Are we together? A person who has died is called a deceased. Must be shared among the children, surviving spouse, and other relatives. This happens when the deceased dies without leaving a will. What is a will? This is simply a legal document that stipulates how the estates, another term here, estates. Estates are simply the property, the things that the person who has died, who is called the deceased, has left on earth. We call those as estates. The wealthy, the houses, the clothes, the land, everything. They are called what? Estates. So happens in cases where the deceased dies without leaving a will. A will describes or is simply a legal document that stipulates how the estates of the deceased must be shared among the children, surviving spouse, and other relatives. Now, there are in some cases whereby a person didn't write a will, and all of a sudden he or she has died. What happens? There is what we call the administrator. This person acts on behalf of the state. This, we mean the country, the nation. This is a person who is in charge of now distributing the estates of the deceased according to the intestate succession. So this one has already stipulated how the things must be shared. But we've got an administrator who comes in now to share those things. Now, let us look at what the intestate succession says about sharing of the things. The deceased left 100% of the property. 100%. 50% goes to the children. 50%. So you calculate the total wealthy of the deceased, and then you get 50% and give to the what? The children. Children includes those born within and outside marriage. Within marriage and outside marriage. In case he had a child not with the surviving spouse or the current spouse, but with another woman or a man, those children are also counted. They also benefit from the 50%. In case there are no children, the deceased dies without leaving any child, the 50% goes to the parents of the deceased, the parents of the person who has died. Then 20% goes for the surviving spouse. It's either the widow or the widower. For a woman who remains without a man because of death is called a widow. A widow. Widower is a man. Man, now the wife has died. We call this as a widow. For women, it's a widow or widows. Now, on the women, we are putting an S there. The widows. This simply means the spouses for the women, they can be more than one. In case a person had more than one wife, he was a polygamist. He was a polygamist. So 20% goes for the spouses. If there are more than one spouse, there are two, there are three, you married the three, they will share the same what? 20%. That's how it is. Then the other 20% goes for the deceased parents. In case there is no spouse, let me explain what. The 20% will go to the children. If there are no spouse, let's take it for instance that one spouse died, and then the one who has died is the last. The spouses are done. They have all died. So the 20% will go to the children. 20% for the parents of the deceased. 10% for the dependents. So you see the protocols here. Children number one, followed by the spouse, then the parents. Not me, I'm the parent. Me, I'm the parent. First to go and take things. Brothers, sisters, and any other relatives of the deceased are not part of the beneficiaries. They should not benefit anything. No, I'm his brother. So what? Brothers, sisters are not part of the beneficiaries. They are not part of the beneficiaries. So 50% for the children, 20% for the spouse, 20% for the deceased, 10% for the dependents. That's what the intestate succession says. So the administrator will just come and calculate the total wealth of the deceased, and then we'll say, okay, of these, 50% will go to the children. We've given 50,000 to the children. Oh, the surviving spouse, 20%. The surviving spouse is not there. Okay, 20% will also go to the children. That's how it is. In case the deceased parents are not there, the parents are not there, this also will go to the children. That's how it is. Dependents are simply those people who are just depending on the deceased. Maybe used to keep my orphans. Those are entitled to the 10%. That is according to the intestate succession. So make sure you are careful when sharing properties after the death of someone, because property grabbing Property grabbing is a criminal case. Property grabbing. You are a sister, no, I'll get the car. How? Those things are not entitled to you. Okay. Now, personal chattels. These are simply things like clothes, the household goods, agriculture, and hunting equipment. The personal, the things of the deceased. The person. There we were talking about wealthy. Wealthy. Then here we're talking about personal chattels such as the clothes, the household goods, agriculture, and hunting equipment. Now, these are exclusively for surviving spouse and children. Exclusively. You don't even need to debate about them, to argue. No. They are specifically for the spouse and the children. Done. He had the car, he had the clothes, he had the household goods, agriculture, the equipment. All those go to the surviving spouse and the children. The house is for the surviving spouse. Look at this. The house remains for the surviving spouse. But if he or she remarries again, you get another wife or another husband, then you cease to be the owner of the house. Go and look for your own house. That's according to the constitution. The house remains yours when your husband or your wife dies. But if you remarry again, you cease to be the owner. Look for your own house. That's according to the constitution of Zambia. Property grabbing is a criminal offense. Make sure you are careful during the sharing of the personal chattels and the wealth of the deceased. Good.